pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all.
Thank you. Need to make an amendment to the agenda. There's going to be a number 4 on new business. It's going to be carrying over from our consent. So it's Kidneys for Kindness nonprofit T-shirt sales, location Alton Bay. At this time, the announcements, the public participation.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The public participation policy applies to all selectmen meetings. A copy of it is in the back of each agenda, posted outside this meeting room and on our website. The Alton Town Clerk Tax Collector's Office will be closed on Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. The staff will be working at the local town and school election from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at Prospect Mountain High School. The office will reopen on Wednesday, March 12th at 12 noon. Now I'd like to move to public input. Do we have any public input for 3 minutes on agenda items only? Seeing none, I'll close public input, and we have no appointments.
No appointments.
We'll move right into new business. Number 1, tie and bond, water assessment management presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much for hosting us. My name is Dan Roop with Tie and Bond. I'm a project manager with Tie and Bond. I'm just going to take a minute to plug the computer in here. And while things fire up, I just wanted to introduce my colleagues here with me. Jess DeJesus, project engineer on this project. Joshua Bouchard, who's one of our rate specialists at Tie and Bond. And then Hannah Milne, who's a staff engineer, helping with rates, and then a grant that we're going to be talking about as well. Just wanted to thank Courtney for her hard work the last year or so on this project, and then Dana Huff, who, as you know, worked previously at Tie and Bond. It was the product director. And then we have Caitlin Curtis from NHTES, whose program helped to fund this project here. Yes.
Thank you. We have one more.
How's that sound? Better? How's that better? Perfect. All right. So you're seeing a duplicate here. I'm just trying to replicate this up on the screen for you. There we go. Okay. So as I said, my name is Daniel Roop, project manager with Tie and Bond, and honored for the time to give the presentation on the Alton Drinking Water System Asset Management program that we went over. The handouts that you have in front of you are for the rate portion, which is when Josh will get up and speak. So a little overview. I'm going to give a 2 or 3 minute introduction to the project. Jess is going to get into the weeds and the nuts and the bolts and the findings and recommendations. Josh is going to peel the Band-Aid off on what it would look like from a financial perspective to pay for these projects and recommendations. And then Hannah is going to come in with some good news to talk about a grant program to help start to fund some of this. As I mentioned before, it was mic'd up. This project was funded entirely by New Hampshire DES, and we're very glad to have Caitlin Curtis from DES here, whose program helped fund this. The town received an $88,000 grant for Tie and Bond to complete this work, working with Courtney and her department. So some of you may remember the Tie and Bond asset management presentation from last year on stormwater. This was a continuation of that work through a slightly different grant program at DES. But just as a reminder, what is asset management? DES defines it as delivering a specified level of service to customers at an optimal life cycle cost and an acceptable level of risk, with a strategy that ensures long-term sustainability of your public assets. In this case, your drinking water system and your storage distribution, and the vertical assets. So these six high level bullets is what we looked at the last year or so. We wanted to define the project team goals with a stakeholder group. We met about a year ago to kick this project off. We talked about what was important to Alton Waterworks and the community to make sure we're providing a high level of service. And then we went around town building an inventory of your drinking water assets, identifying what was critical, prioritizing recommendations based on, age, condition, known trouble spots, areas where you might not have available fire flow, and things like that in your distribution system and vertical system. We then looked at the water rates. So what are ratepayers currently paying for water service, and what do we need to adjust the rates to pay for the products we're going to recommend here? And then we'll also get into the next steps. So last year when we had our level of service workshop and then kickoff, we developed a vision statement. So this is the Alton Waterworks vision statement, where we'd like to adopt a data-driven, risk-based approach to asset management. The town and the Waterworks will strive to capture and preserve institutional knowledge and maintain a legacy of expertise for ongoing service continuity. Through proactive maintenance and prompt repairs, the town commits to improving and maintaining public health protection, upholding high standards, and delivering clean, safe water to the community. We then met to discuss the level of service goals with a number of stakeholders. I won't get into the details, but there were 10 level of service goals. Each of them fell into one of these 4 buckets: asset preservation and condition, conservation, compliance, and enforcement. Basically making sure that Courtney and her team are helping to comply with your permit, right? Health and safety, to make sure the public is safe, that they're drinking safe, clean drinking water, but also that your operators are safe in the work that they're doing, and the facilities are kept safe. And then you're providing service quality and cost. So you want to maintain an appropriate balance as well to perform these operations, minimize unaccounted for water, and just have a high functioning system. So that's the overview that I'll give for now. I might bounce back up later on when we start talking about the grant program with Hannah and to answer questions. But I'll pass it over to Jess, who's going to get into the meat of the presentation and give you an overview on our findings. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Dan. So for this portion of the presentation, I'm going to be walking through the process of our condition assessment and how we generated recommendations for the system. So as a note, I'm going to be referencing horizontal assets and vertical assets. So when I say horizontal, I'm referring to the water distribution system. So water mains, transmission lines. And when I say vertical, that will be more of your treatment assets. So pumps, piping within buildings, treatment, and storage tanks. So just for some clarity there. So we started with the distribution system as our horizontal assets. And we began with basically an inventory of the water mains, taking what the town waterworks already had, which was living in a Google Maps format, and combining it with the existing hydraulic model data to create a more cohesive geographic information system where all of the asset information is all in one place and consistently formatted and organized. And so by doing that, we were able to get a good breakdown of the different distribution of assets within the distribution system. So I'll kind of talk through a few of the different materials and sizes we've got. So the majority of the system is high density polyethylene. We also have a good percentage of ductile iron and cast iron. And I'll note the values in the middle there. Those are linear footage of those pipe materials. And there's a breakdown of the percent as well. For size, the majority of the system is 6-inch with 8-inch shortly following. So that's just kind of a general overview of the water main distribution system. And so from there, I'm going to jump into the inventory and condition assessment that we performed for the vertical assets. So we visited the town of Alton's 2 water wells. So that is Jonesfield and Levy Park. And we also did a pretty comprehensive review of the inspections of the Bay Hill tank. So I'll walk through kind of what we found at each of those sites in the condition assessment and some of our recommendations for these sites. But first, we had to kind of develop an inventory of what is here. So this is just a little peek at our inventory. There's a lot of data that we were collecting for each asset. So model numbers, serial numbers, install years, and all of this went into our risk analysis that I'll talk about more shortly. But that's kind of just a peek at our inventory. So I'll start with the Bay Hill tank condition assessment. So for this, we did review some of the videos of the in-tank inspections that were performed. And following this, as you can see, there are some pretty considerable defects within the Bay Hill tank, including some spalling, as you can see in the top left corner, some pretty significant floor cracks. There are also some cracks on the walls, and considerable blistering and corrosion on the interior pipes. Excuse me. So based off of this inspection and some of the recommendations from the tank inspectors, the town waterworks was pursuing funding to evaluate either repair or replacement alternatives for the Bay Hill tank, as well as just do a general system assessment looking at capacity, fire flows, and a few other factors through a hydraulic model to kind of compare different alternatives for repairing or replacing this tank. And happy to announce that the town was awarded a water system sustainability grant that had been submitted in November. So that will go into evaluating alternatives to address what is some considerable concerns. We also visited the Jonesfield well to do a inventory and condition assessment. So the Jonesfield well has sodium hypochlorite and sodium hydroxide chemical feed systems. And so the main recommendations that we have, aside from repairing assets that have some wear and tear, for example, as you can see, the pipe around the chemical injection sites is considerably corroded, so we're recommending that that be replaced. We mainly have recommendations that are operations-based. So for the chemical feed systems, it's recommended by New Hampshire DES that they have some level of dosage control. So currently, chemicals are taken from the bulk tanks and pumped directly into the water main. So the recommendation would be to have a standing day tank where the chemical is put in, tested, and dose controlled, just so that way it can be more easily monitored as it is being pumped into the main. So that is one of the main recommendations for this site, is those chemical feed upgrades. Some of the electrical equipment at Jonesfield is also starting to reach the end of its useful life. And so those are going to be recommended for improvements as well, although a little less critical compared to some of the other conditions that we saw. Jumping over to Levy Park, similar to Jonesfield, we have recommendations based around dosage control for the 2 chemical feed systems, installation of a day tank to provide that dosage control. Another concern for this well is actually the location of the well building itself. So as you can see where it's located within Levy Park, there are considerable trees around the pump house that pose a risk if there were to be a tree that collapsed or there was an access concern. And so based on that, it also limits the ability for this space to be expanded if we wanted to, for example, add to the chemical feed system. There's limited space and not much you can do with the exterior of the building if you were to. like put in a larger building. So we are recommending for Levy Park that an alternatives analysis be performed to look at different options for if it would be cost effective to either relocate this well or just look at different options to mitigate the risk of its location currently. And also the electrical equipment is also reaching the end of its useful life, similar to Jones. So from here, we ask the question of, we know what the concerns are, but when should we be doing them? What should we address first? And so the approach we took for this is an asset management-based approach, looking at risk as the product of the probability of failure and the consequence of failure. So the probability of failure refers to how likely an asset is to fail. And we base this off of the age of the asset, so how much of its life has been consumed, its current condition, its capacity, and any regulatory compliance drivers. We also look at the consequence of failure. So if this asset were to fail, what is that consequence? Is it catastrophic or is it something that's easily mitigated? And so for the consequence of failure, this is based on the type of asset, a safety component, as well as redundancy. So for example, if a pump were to fail, but you had a backup pump on a shelf that you could pretty easily install, that is more redundancy than if you didn't have a backup. So for each of the assets that we collected inventory data on, we then went through and applied these rankings, numbered 1 through 5 for each of those different categories. And those get weighted and averaged to generate POF and COF scores. So these are just the POF columns, and these are the COF columns. And so once we have a POF and COF score, so as a reminder, that's probability of failure and consequence of failure, we use an asset management matrix to determine the appropriate strategy for these assets. So I'll kind of walk through this graphic a bit. If you can imagine, let's say we have, as an example, a metering pump at Jones Field. And this is a real example of what we did for this pump. We would look at what the probability of failure is based on this pump's condition, its age, its ability to meet requirements, and the consequence if it were to fail. So in this case, this one has a probability of failure of 3. It's in relatively good condition. But, it's kind of got some wear and tear. And a consequence of failure of 4 because this is a dosing pump. So this is what's providing the chemicals into the water to treat them. And so if we look at the intersection, this falls into if you remember from the last slide, priority replace/repair. So it's not as critical as other assets, but it is a little more critical than some where you might want to prioritize maintenance over replacement. And so this exercise was done for each of the assets that were in that large table to create a distribution that you can see here. So I'll walk through kind of each of these graphics. So the table on your top left, that shows a number of assets at each location and where they fell on our strategies. So as you can see, the majority of the assets are in the priority maintenance category. And that's where we want them. So that is, they're not close to failure, but we know that they're important. And so we want to make sure we're maintaining them. We do have a number of assets, about 25%, in that priority repair or replace area. So those are higher on the list of when they need to be addressed. And then we have some critical replace and repair items as well. So that includes the Bay Hill tank, as well as that section of corroded pipe. Those are in that critical area. And from here, we are able to develop projects based around this. And so the order that these projects are in is based on that risk table from the prior slide. So these are the vertical asset recommendations. So number one, we have storage, as I was talking about, the Bay Hill tank replacement project. So this right now is carrying a cost for replacement. That being said, we do have that grant to do an alternatives analysis for the tank, whether it be repair or replace. Project number two is an alternatives analysis of Levy Park. And then 3 and 4 are those chemical feed upgrades I talked about. 5 and 6, similarly, the electrical upgrades I talked about. And this is assuming a 5-year capital improvement plan. And Josh is going to talk a little bit more about the scheduling of these projects. So those are the vertical asset recommendations. So for the horizontal asset prioritization, this work was actually primarily performed by Tata and Howard. And so they evaluated the distribution system looking at 3 areas: system hydraulics, critical components, and asset management, similar to what I talked about before, POF and COF. And so they prioritized projects that showed poor hydraulics, that had critical components, and that had a high risk based on the asset management. And so some of these projects are highlighted in the figure to the right that I know is a little difficult to see, but I have a nice little table of those as well. So these are the projects that were generated by Tata and Howard. And so we incorporated those into this asset management plan and just escalated the cost from 2022 to 2024. And so these projects include work on Main Street from Mount Major Highway to Barnes Avenue, replacing water mains, Bay Hill Road from the Bay Hill Tank connection to Main Street, Levy Park, from the Levy Park Pump House to Main Street, the Frank C. Gilman Highway, and Wolfboro Highway. So another big part of asset management is looking towards the maintenance of your system. So you don't want to just be replacing things that need to be replaced. You also want to be maintaining the system. And so we carried some annual maintenance activities costs, including routine and preventative well maintenance, as well as routine and preventative maintenance of the water distribution system. And we also carried a cost for program improvements. So like I talked about at the beginning, we did do a pretty comprehensive update to the geographic information system, the MAP. That being said, as water mains are replaced or repairs are made, some of this data can change. So we want to really keep on top of that because, a GIS system is only as helpful as it is accurate. And so one of the tools we also developed for the town are GIS-related tools. So these are forms and data that would have originally be collected on paper that has now been digitized and can be done and linked through the geographic information system. And so the town actually, Waterworks staff, as part of the previous asset management program for stormwater, already received some considerable GIS training for using the iPads and Field Maps app. So these are some additional forms to add to that. So we have an O&M form, that's operation and maintenance, a CMMS form, a hydrant flushing form. So every time a hydrant is flushed, this can be completed and linked with that hydrant, as well as a valve exercising form. So each time a valve is exercised, this can be completed and it will be geographically linked to that valve. And so this helps to track the maintenance that is being performed on the system. So I just went through a lot of different projects that need to be done. And now I will toss it over to Josh, who has the harder job of talking about how to fund these projects.
How's everyone doing today? So before we get into the actual meat and potatoes of this model, I wanted to give a brief overview of how this model was built. So The main goal of doing rate analysis is to balance what's coming into your enterprise and what's leaving your enterprise. What comes into your enterprise are your revenues, your non-rate revenues, and any additional transfers of funds from other enterprises, basically any positive cash flow into your system. What comes out of your enterprise fund are your day-to-day expenses, your supplies, your existing debts, and any capital projects that you've dealt with. So once we have a baseline understanding of what's coming in and out of your system, we can identify what your net revenue would be. The net revenue is the differences between what's coming in and what's coming out. From there, we can project what your revenues are based on your current usage and your current customer basis, and what your projected expenditures are. For this analysis, we assumed that year to year, your expenses would go up by about 5%. From there, we can figure out what the rates need to be increased by year to year to keep yourself out of the red and maintain a certain threshold in your enterprise fund. After that, to make sure that we're not raising your rates too much, we took a look at affordability and equity for the lowest quintile income. That's your financially vulnerable population. So we want to make sure that we're really not burdening them with these rate increases. So as we've discussed previously with all of these capital projects, this is what it looks like altogether. It's a whole lot. We end up with $13.7 million. But because these projects aren't all happening in the same year, we like to escalate those costs a little bit to account for inflation. So these costs end up going about another $1 million to account for this inflation. This is the 5-year plan that we've talked about before. The other thing that's really important to note about all of these capital projects is there's no grant funding for this model. If there was grant funding, these rates would look very differently. But because grants are an unknown and you don't know if you're going to get them, we want to account for the worst possible situation. The way that we differentiated between what was going to be a debt-funded project and what was going to be a rate-funded project was its cost. Anything over $100,000 was assumed to be a debt-funded project, and anything below that was going to be a capital or rate-funded project. For debt-funded projects, we assumed that the term of the loan would last 20 years and there would be 5% interest with it. So now to the fun part. The rates need to be increased by quite a bit to address all of these capital projects within this 5-year period. We're looking at a rate increase this year of 75%. That's a big, scary number. The next year, we're looking at a 70% increase. Again, another really big, scary number. So before we go any further, we also did 2 analyses. We did one analysis looking at a more aggressive approach, and then we looked at a more financially realistic approach that doesn't include these big, scary rate increases. What these increases would look like for an average customer is about a $750 increase in their annual bill in the year 2025, and then another $1,225 increase in 2026. Again, huge numbers. So to put this all into perspective and to have an understanding of what this is going to do to this lower quintile income bracket, what we like to look at is we like to look at the percentage of the income and the annual bill. 7% is usually the threshold where we start to get worried about the impact. We hit 7% in 2027. So we hit it really quickly. Not good. Another reason for these large rate increases is the overall health of your enterprise fund currently. Historically, the town of Alton has not put a lot of money aside for capital expenditures or savings. So right out of the gate, you guys don't have a lot of money to work with, which is fine. That some communities have that issue. But for you guys specifically, you only have about $280,000 in savings. And we're talking about millions and millions of dollars worth of projects here. So that's not going to pay for anything. The magic number to look for is 3 months of retained earnings. This approach gives you about 4 months in 2029, and that equates to about $300,000. And as discussed previously, this is going to be a percentage of your operational costs versus your retained earnings. Moving on to the more realistic approach. So for this approach, we pushed all of your projects to starting in 2030. On top of that, we pushed these projects from going from a 5-year capital plan to a 10-year capital plan. Now, the big consequence of going with that option is, number one, you have to deal with increased inflation from these projects. So remember when we looked at it before, it was about 15 million for all these projects. We're now looking at 20 million for all of these projects. So a $5 million difference. The other big thing that is really important, especially from an asset management perspective, is the more that you push these projects out, the greater the chance that these assets are going to fail. So you have to balance the financial burden of doing this and the potential risk of having a catastrophic failure happening. So what does this look like for your ratepayers? Now, one of the other things that we did in the second option is, instead of having all rates increased the same, we looked at trying to break these costs down between the lower income bracket and your higher income bracket. We're making the assumption that the summer connections are in your higher income bracket so that they can take on a little bit more of the financial burden. Another thing to note about this is that the lower income bracket is billed based on usage. Summer connections are only billed a flat fee. So you're not capturing everything. So a higher summer user could be using so much more water than one of your metered connections, and you would have no idea because they're being charged a single rate. So as you can see, the numbers are much more reasonable. We're not looking at 70s, we're looking at 14s, 20s. 20s is still pretty high, but because your summer connections are, again, being billed a flat rate, it's not as noticeable as these 14% are. The other thing to note about this approach is, because we're going with the smaller rate increases, the burden is much lower on your lower income brackets. For this purpose, also, we looked at what the impact would be on the higher income bracket. And as you can see, and I wish you could see my pointer, but at the very bottom, those last couple numbers, those are the burden impacts for your highest income bracket. They're very low. Now, in consideration for them, they're only there about 3 months out of the year. So it's okay for those numbers to be a little bit lower. They don't hit 1% at all. Another thing to consider is, if you look at the next lowest income bracket, it's only about a $50,000 difference between the highest and the next tier. So we're anticipating that those are going to be all of your summer connections. And with that consideration, we think that if we did the fourth quintile income bracket, they'd be at about 1% household burden. Again, as we've discussed before, the current state of your enterprise fund requires a lot of these rate increases. We, again, try to hit the 3-month period. We end up with about 5.4 months by 2029. And this is a much more viable option financially. Now, to wrap up this presentation, now that we've talked about how these projects are going to get funded, let's talk about next steps for the town of Alton. And I'll give it off to Dan.
All right, so we've just unpacked a lot at you. So before we go on and talk about some of the next steps, I'm glad to entertain some questions now, or I'm going to talk through the recommended next steps, and we can go back through some of the slides, however the board wants. But feel free, as I should have mentioned at the beginning, to jump in and have conversation throughout. But just the next steps, 5 of them right here, I wanted to highlight. The Water System Sustainability Grant. My colleague Hannah is going to give an overview on this grant program, which we think is an appropriate next step to really dive in and evaluate what the right approach is for Bay Hill, and then making sure, you know, from a distribution system that we're truly nailing the first projects, right? We listed out 5 or 6 horizontal projects. You know, should we push one off further down the road? Can we afford to push one off down the road? That's the balancing act, right? That the board and Courtney and everyone needs to decide and understand, like, the consequence of failure. So that further analysis through the water sustainability grant, I think will help flesh out more of the conversation and just give even more data to drive the decision. Pursuing additional funding to offset the need for raising the rates. As Josh said, we were looking, we weren't considering grants. We weren't considering other opportunities to fund this from potential other accounts in town. This is just rate funded is what Josh was looking at, and debt funded, debt and rate. Completing the meter installation program for the water system. As Josh indicated, your summer connections, and not all of the non-summer folks are metered, right? So to be more equitable, you could have someone that's filling their pool, washing their car, flushing out, washing their boats, the fleets, the yachts, everything, using a ton of water, and they could be paying the same as, a single elderly individual, in theory, right? So we want to, meters are a great way to have some equitable usage, and then you can talk about different tiers. Once you use more than X gallons, all right, you're probably doing a lot of, luxury water usage, right? So you should be probably paying more for that. So with the meters, you can get into some more equitable water rate setting, and Josh and his team can get really creative to make sure we're not impacting the lower income folks, but the higher income folks are paying their fair share for the system. And then complete a follow-up rate evaluation after all those meters have been installed. And we're going to be working with Katie and her team to complete this project, this asset management project, and get you your final reimbursement for the $88,000, since it's a reimbursement grant. So Courtney's team has been paying the time bond invoices, and then we'll get the town reimbursed for all of those expenses. So we wanted to turn it over and talk about the water sustainability grant. I think that's probably an appropriate next step, and then we can take questions on anything that we've gone over thus far. And as Hannah's coming up, I will mention that some of those rates and those numbers that we were showing, we're trying to be conservative, right? We don't want to be the low bidder on this. We want to be the high. So we have contingencies in there. We have engineering in there. Some of the costs that we're talking about, maybe they could be softer, but we want to be conservative, right? So just to help the heart rates and pulses come down a little bit with some of those scary numbers you saw. But to help your heart rate come down even less, we'll have Hannah talk about this grant here.
Hey, everybody. I am going to wrap it up by talking about this cool grant that we got. So earlier last year in November, like Jess was saying, we submitted an application. And then in December, we heard back that it was successful and we were awarded the maximum grant amount of $30,000, which based on our project cost, our estimated project cost, we're expecting it to be about $60,000. So that's half funded by the grant, and then the town is required to match $15,000, so half of the grant amount. And then, but yeah, we're estimating that it'll be another 30 for the town to match through either cash match or in-kind service hours. So the project name is the Alton Water System Resiliency Alternatives Assessment. And the first goal of this is to complete a tank storage capacity analysis to confirm the tank is still providing enough storage to meet the town's needs. And also the second goal is to complete a life cycle analysis of the storage tank to see where the tank is in its useful life, and evaluate if tank rehabilitation or tank replacement is more efficient and or more cost effective for the town. Finally, we'll be completing a hydraulic deficiency analysis, which is an inspection of a water system to identify potential issues that could lead to failure and developing a plan to prevent these issues. This includes things like ensuring sufficient fire flow, closing dead ends, increasing capacity, improving redundancy, and improving the water quality. And then the outcomes of this project should be a report from Ty and Bond summarizing our recommendations for the storage tank and the hydraulic systems improvements. And then we'll be providing an updated hydraulic model as well of the town's water system, water distribution system. So yeah, the project includes status updates to the DES every 3 months and has an estimated completion date of the end of 2026. So yeah, it'll help Alton plan out their next steps for all of these projects, especially the big Bay Hill tank. So yeah. Any questions?
Many.
Yeah, so we'll have Hannah can flip, why don't you stay there and drive in case you want to go back to any other slides, but we can pass it up and down, or I'm not sure if Courtney or Dana wanted to chime in on anything, or NHDES.
So obviously, some of these projects have already happened, right? We already received the catastrophic failure of the generator, so that's been replaced. So we got that right out of the way. Sorry. You know, we have a really talented group at the water department. You guys hear me say that all the time. Some of these numbers that they've given you, we're very well and capable of keeping the cost down to take on some of these projects as we have in the past. It's nothing for us to continue a loop as time permits. I just tax the guys with a project. There's still a cost associated with it. We have to buy the material. But, you know, we are crafty when it comes to that. So some of these numbers, you know, you're looking at engineering costs and all of the things that go into a large project that's like the school and Church Street project, which some of you are aware of. We have the ability to keep some of those costs down. So even though the numbers are escalated, it was most important to me, and I think Josh, when we met in a Zoom meeting, I said, absolutely not, I'm not going to support a 300% or whatever increase, because I won't stand by that. We need to find some other way to get around this. If that means us doing more on our end, that's what needs to be done. But these are all, you know, we've spent a lot of time in the water department picking up mistakes or problems from the past. Unfortunately, that's why we're not where we are financially. But in the same respect, we do it all ourselves. So for the most part, I mean, you know, we handled putting the generator in, we did all that besides the electrical work. Some of these 6-inch water mains that we've already looped in the system, some people don't even know what's been done. But, you know, rest assured that you're at least in good hands, that we're going to work with the engineering firms and the consultants to find a feasible alternative. The tank is something that we're not equipped to do. And it's not a surprise to anyone. We've been talking about the tank as long as I've been here. We do keep the routine maintenance, and that's why we're able to provide you with pictures and how we're performing and how the tank's holding up. But it is very important. So the reason I'm here, obviously, to support these guys and you know, see their work, but is to get the approval from the board to move forward with that grant. We didn't rank high enough when we applied for the SRF, the SRF loan for the tank. I think we ranked 84. We were a little low. So this sustainability grant is going to help us, you know, inch up the list. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I mean, like I said, you know, the rate increase is inevitable. I did the best I could in the past with not having accurate flow data and usage with the meter program. We've already installed 250 meters in-house to keep the cost down. We're really chugging away with that. So we have a better idea as to, you know, what users are using and where that money's going. But we knew this was eventually going to have to be a complete rate increase, which is what you got, a rate study. We were just increasing, hoping to generate a little bit more income at the end. But this is the accurate and correct way to do a rate study, and we fell behind the mark. It hasn't, when I came on board, the rates weren't increased. From 2015 was the last time, so we're behind, and I think everybody feels that everything's going up, and we have to adjust that. But I promise we'll try to spend the money the best way and do right by the residents. So that's it.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just to add a little bit to that too, after the conversations with Courtney and also being part of the inception of this grant and program, just making it very clear for the public along the lines of what Courtney's saying and for the board, this was designed to be an overview study. These are large numbers. The intent wasn't that we were going to hit the community over the head with anything. It was that if we didn't know where we were starting, we don't know where to go from there. And that's simply, I really wanted to stress that point for anybody watching the meeting and the people in attendance and the board members, that the intention isn't to come back to the community and say that we have $13 million worth of projects to do next year. It's identifying, one, the prioritizing the important projects, seeing what those are, laying them out, having the discussion now so that if we have a catastrophic failure, it's not a surprise to the community 2 years down the road. Unfortunately, we got hit over the head with a $36,000 generator that failed on us all of a sudden, and the board, we had to react to that. And we were fortunate to have the funding to be able to pull that out and make it happen. Unfortunately, some of these other projects, we would not be so fortunate if something happened. And being the tank, being the big, you saw those numbers, I think the tank alone is almost $4 million projected replacement costs. So doing this tank assessment with the new grant that was approved is very important in the sense that we don't really have a clear understanding completely of what it's going to take and the resources needed to replace that tank or a more cost-effective alternative. And I just wanted to stress too with this grant program. This was newly approved. That's why it was on the table for the board tonight. It just barely got approved. But the intention with this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Courtney, but in our conversations, the intention is that the match that the town will be providing in this grant will be what they call a soft match, which will be through resources and time, sweat equity that we put into it through the water department, and not a hard match, which would be, an actual cash match where we have to generate the funding. So that would be the intention if the board were to authorize the acceptance of this grant and moving forward.
And the acceptance of the grant would just be for research to see how the tank is?
Yeah, it's a total assessment of the.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, the tasks that we would be looking at, it's the tank storage capacity analysis. It's a 250,000 gallon tank right now. Is that appropriate, longer term for the community? The tank life cycle analysis, again, is there an alternative? Does it, make sense? Is there a reasonable option to do some type of rehabilitation? And let's just make sure we're not flattening this and building a new one just because it's fun to have something new and shiny. So doing a proper tank life cycle analysis. Hydraulic deficiency analysis is included as well, which, as Hannah was talking about, looking at areas where you don't have adequate fire flow and making sure that we're able to provide appropriate flows and pressures at the extent of your system when we're designing this. So the hydraulic model is a very powerful, neat tool in that you can get pressure, you can get flow data. And it also lets you know if there's going to be some water quality, like water age, right? Water age is a water quality concern. So making sure things are appropriate. Courtney and her team, as she indicated, have done a great job closing loops because you don't want to have dead ends, right? The water will just go to the end of a pipe and sit there. But if you can connect a loop, and the water's continuously flowing around, that's going to reduce water age. This study also looks at redundancy and resiliency in your system. So let's say you do have a pipe burst in one of those older pipes or materials that are not as robust. If it's a straight stick of pipe and you have a pipe failure at the midpoint, everyone else beyond that break is going to have no water. But if you close a loop, you can picture that pipe break happens, but the water can go around and come in the back end to serve those residents or those critical areas. So that's a part of this analysis as well, through the grant program. And there is a we talked about like this the soft match, the in-kind services are great. I think it's working with Courtney to hash out exactly how much the town wants to provide the in-kind services versus putting money towards the hard data crunching. So it's $30,000 grant and then a $15,000 minimum contribution. Our estimates would say like, hey, if the town can push to go towards that $30,000, maybe half of it is if the town does have 15 or so, that would allow 45,000 worth of engineering, then 15,000 worth of the town's efforts. So we can work with whatever Courtney and the town feels appropriate to push, just to try to maximize making good decisions down the road for you all. So that's the little more overview on the grant. I'm not sure too, if Caitlin, if it's appropriate or if you have anything else you wanted to add regarding the grant.
Question, if I could. You probably have done several studies like this for other municipalities. Is this fairly typical or is this shocking or? I should
There
go
we go, there we
home
go.
and kiss my well, I think.
Right. No, I mean, to believe it or not, you're in better shape than some communities we've worked with. Some communities are further down the road, but this is very typical, right? I mean, just the fact that just how proactive Courtney has been installing the meters, going out there, the fact that you have a very hands-on crew is wonderful. Some communities, they don't want to get their hands dirty. They'll have to hire everything out. So Courtney and the team, you're lucky to have them and the work that they're doing. The initiative that you took to create the GIS model and hydraulic model originally, that's wonderful too. Some other communities, their inventory is in the operator who retired last year's head or napkin. So, we've seen worse certainly, but I mean, that's exciting and there's optimism too, because we've helped those communities move further, right? Move those goalposts so we can see where the story is going to end up and it can work out for everybody and be equitable. And these are very scary numbers that we put up there. And thanks to Courtney's team's savviness and willingness to get down and dirty, once we relook at the rates, I think it'll be much more equitable for everybody. But we wanted to paint kind of the worst picture. If you just completely hands off, tie and bond design everything, sub everything out, put it out to bid. That's the picture we wanted to paint. Good question.
And did your projections use an average of 5% for inflation?
Yeah.
Are we talking for the construction costs?
Well, overall cost thing.
Overall, the 5% is associated with your budgeted expenditures. The year-to-year expenses for construction purposes is dependent on year to year. It's based on the ENR values, the engineering news and report numbers. They publish construction values year to year, and depending on the progress of where construction is, you have different numbers year to year. So it's a much more conservative value than just putting one number.
Okay, so year to year, what did you use for numbers? That was-
For construction purposes, it changes year to year. For your operation budgeting, that's 5%.
That's 5%,
Yeah.
okay.
I couldn't tell you year to year what it is for construction. I'd have to get into the model.
Thank you.
I was going to say, right, the numbers are in there. We can dive in afterwards and get you those exact numbers. They're plugged into the computer program. It'd be a little time consuming to go through and
Oh,
get those
okay.
calculations, but
Well, that's fine.
they're in there, yeah.
Thank you.
We could though, yeah, yeah.
If I may, the photos of the Bay Hill tank, those are a little frightening.
How old are those?
2024.
And,
Oh, yeah, pictures are 20.
pre-earthquake. You know, when I look at something like that, I think, catastrophic failure is imminent. And how much deeper are we diving into evaluating the condition of the tank to determine just how big of an emergency this potentially is?
I think it's setting you up for, it's, goes against the spirit of the grant a little bit, but it's kind of preliminary design too. Like, is it the appropriate size, right? Do we replace it with a 250,000 gallon tank, or do you go up to a 500,000 gallon or a 300,000 gallon tank? So that capacity analysis is something you would do as a part of preliminary design. So it's the first step that you would do anyways if you were going to replace it. But is there a way to repair this? That's something that is going to be looked at as a part of it, but we're not naive. We see this and we read the reports, and I think we know where we're going to be doing. It'll likely be a tank replacement project, but just to make sure that each stone is uncovered.
Right. So, assuming this is why it was number one on the priority list, that obviously you have concerns as well. But I think my question was, apart from doing the analysis, figuring out is it adequately sized right now, will you be doing any more study into the condition of it to determine just how critical this is?
So I want to also jump back a little bit to what Courtney had said previously, as I think it's helpful. The town waterworks has been really good about routinely inspecting this tank. So while this is very jarring to look at for the first time, the tank is being currently monitored. So the inspections are being done on a routine basis every 5 years. So because of that, there is a level of monitoring already happening. Dan can probably speak more to how that fits into the scope, but I can understand your concern of like, it does look catastrophic. Monitoring to see changes within this condition is going to be critical to this process.
And is 5 years, is a 5-year cycle reasonable, or should we be looking at 6-month cycles? And let's face it, this looks pretty bad.
So our requirements are to clean and inspect the tank every 5 years, and that's been done. As much as these look very scary to you, you need to remember that these are submerged in water. Tuberculation is a natural thing. The cracks, when the divers go in the tank, they measure those cracks. Remember that, you know, they're trying to support what we need to do to move forward. These are just a snapshot in time of some of the pictures in the tank. I do receive a report from the tank inspection people with their assessment and what their recommendations are. Right now, we didn't move forward with any of those recommendations because we were in the middle of applying for an SRF loan to replace or repair the tank, which leads us to February. And, you know, we did not receive that. We did receive the strategic planning grant, which is part of the precursor to look into basically the feasibility of whether we're going to replace or repair the tank. So these are all, as much as those are very scary, and I'm not saying that, you know, knock on wood, something catastrophic could happen. These pictures are not just pictures. They come with a very thorough assessment and recommendations that are also rated by the tank inspection company as to where to go from here. Is that something that we should probably look into temporarily as we move forward? Maybe. We might have to hit those number ones on the assessment to buy ourselves some time. Not doing anything is doing something. So this is kind of where we're at right now. But yes, those pictures are very scary, but so aren't boats that sit in the ocean. Doesn't mean they're not worth anything. They that's what they do. So, you know, your pipes in the ground look the same in some places inside. So, you know, it's the nature of the beast. It is a scary and a very serious thing, but nothing that, you know, I guess, you know what I mean? We're in the middle here and we're deciding at the fork in the road which way we need to go. But these needed to be shared with everyone to understand the importance of where we're going.
I appreciate that. Why don't you hang on to that for a moment? You mentioned you have pipes that are looking like this, and I imagine, I mean, we've got cast iron
Yep.
pipes. By my quick math, it was like 4 miles, give or take a banana.
Yep.
And I believe that, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that showed up as well as one of the higher priority areas to address, and I think it was primarily the cast iron runs that looked like those were the highest, the priority. Am I correct?
It's due to the location of where they are, right? They're in Main Street. They're on 140. So they're, you know, a one-way feed to your major users. So that helps rank them, not only the year that they were installed, the material that's installed, and where they are. It all comes into play. You know, you do find, because we have a very good flushing program and we do use corrosion control, that a lot of the pipes look worse from the outside. They're actually looking pretty good from the inside.
Okay.
You know, we don't generally receive a lot of taste and odor complaints or dirty water complaints unless, of course, we made a repair or we have an active leak. Once we got rid of the School and Church Street problem, that dirty water problem had kind of gone away. We flush twice a year, depending on winter, when it comes early or when it leaves late. So, you know, we try to keep that maintenance program going. But yeah, I mean, there's some tuberculated pipes, and that's just from the years prior to having a good maintenance program. We try to keep up with that, and then when we flush hydrants, we do get big chunks of iron, you know, in our diffusers and on the ground. But the damage is already done. We're just trying to
Yeah.
prevent things from getting worse.
And what's your preferred pipe type to replace as you go down the road? I mean, is it DI or is it polyethylene or?
So this question always gets asked to me. We use a lot of the high-density polyethylene pipe. My crew is very good at fusing pipe. It's very thick. It does very well in arable soil. They use it a lot for boring crossings and things like that when they directionally drill. I'm not a fan of ductile for 2 reasons: the corrosion and the cost. It's very expensive. Do I love HDPE? Not at all. No, I mean, it's great when you put it in the first time, but if you have to go back, it's not fun to work with. So from an operational or maintenance standpoint, it's good for the first run, but hopefully the goal for my department is to not have to go back twice. But I do not prefer metallic pipe, just because of the soil we have in the ground, the backfill and the corrosion. And with all the lead and copper and all the other headaches that we're facing as, public drinking water, I prefer to use the less corrosive, types of pipe. But, I mean, we use them all, so.
How many households do we have that are still on flat rate that have not been switched over?
So
yet?
I should have these numbers for you, and I apologize that I don't, because it's an active, it's an, but they've changed a little bit, but do you have those numbers? Okay, but I will tell you that we've installed 250 meters in homes that either needed new meters because the meters stopped, they were old and couldn't take the radios for the meter program. The biggest problem with installing meters for the summer users is staff. So those meters need to get installed in the spring. They need to
Pulled
be
out every-
removed in the winter. You have to have a place to keep them, and you need to have the staff to go in and pull those meters all the time. And unfortunately, we don't have a shelf full of meters, where, like I said before, and I don't think you were on the board when we initiated this meter program, to have another company to come in and just blast them out in, say, a month, create the appointments, have all the meters, install them. It's about a $600,000 project. And that was when we looked at it in the beginning. I don't even know what it would cost now. So we're doing it in-house and saving a lot of money. And that's always, I'll try to do that as much as possible till I can't. So we are doing it in-house. I did up the meter program this year and to keep going with that installation program, but unfortunately the summer ones are, it's tough. If they forget to call us to pull their meter out because for 25 years they didn't have a meter, well, it freezes and we're out $300. So the summer lines are a difficult thing to navigate through. But we are trying to narrow down the flat rate users and if anyone is on even though they might have a camp that they only come to in the summertime, if they have a year-round line that's going by their house, we're installing meters and charging them quarterly because they have access to it. And unfortunately, yeah, you may only come up to go boating in the summer, but someone just like you uses their house in the winter to go skiing, and they don't come up in the summer. So the way we're narrowing it down is if you have a year-round line going past your house, then you have the ability to have year-round water, and we're installing meters. But Josh provided me with those numbers. So we have 532 metered and 232 unmetered, which is different than when I first took over, we had
Sounds like numbers were just about flipped.
300 and something unmetered, and then all the summer were unmetered. So, so we're chugging away, but we're doing it with now three crew members. So
Yeah, no, great presentation, and Courtney, I can't say enough, the water department has been just absolutely outstanding, and we're lucky to have you. There's no question about it. But terrific presentation by Ty and Bond. It was very informative, very jarring, but sometimes you
Shocking.
gotta take it on the chin and figure out how to go, and so,
Is it
thank
your
you.
recommendation that we take the grant to do an analysis on the town?
oh yeah. I mean for the tank alone. I mean, like Dan had mentioned. I mean, this is all precursors to what eventually is going to get done, and hopefully, we work with someone who accepts our research to go with building or repairing the tank. But none of this is anything that I do in the water department is a precursor to the next stage. So like when we put in the PLC panels, they're set up so they can have 5 more alarms added to it for like chlorine, pH control, all that stuff. So we try not to do anything, so we have to do it twice. So this is, hopefully this will help us rank higher because, DES will see that we're actively trying to find alternatives and funding opportunities to do what needs to be done. And we have the records for the tank inspections that we're upkeeping and that we're identifying problems and trying to, figure out a way to make it a solution, so. Funding, coming up with $30,000 after replacing a generator, it's bad timing. But we're either going to do it now or we're going to do it when we do the tank. So if we can get it out of the way and the funding is a 50% match, then, there may not be a match. We'll be paying interest on it if it's a loan or whatever way we end up getting funding for the tank, so. Yeah, go for it.
For what it's worth to it, we're probably talking, July 2025 is when it would kick off. That's when the grant would officially begin, and then headed into 2026. So you could span 1 or 2 fiscal years if that made a difference. And then just to reemphasize what Courtney said, to rank higher, we're talking about, next time when we go to apply for the SRF loan, which is what we're not able to be successful with last year. But this sustainability grant, we think, will position the town to score higher, because there's a number of criteria that we can then, add into the application.
Any other questions? I'll make a motion. We accept the water system sustainability grant for $30,000 with Ryan to sign for it.
I'll second. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you all so much for your time. Appreciate it.
On to number 2, solid waste department, the garage furnace replacement. Seth, come on up.
Good evening, Seth. End of December, grounds and maintenance went up to the solid waste facility to repair some metal ductless pipe that comes off of the garage there, the first building on the driveway. Thank you. Thank you.
When they got there was a piece of metal asbestos pipe that had been removed by falling ice and snow. So they went up there to fix that. And while there, they attempted to fire the furnace up there and it wouldn't light. It's a propane fired furnace. Hot, forced hot air up in the ceiling, just a garage heater. They attempted to fire it up. It wouldn't light. So at that time we called Lang's to come up and have a look at it. We've used Lang's recently for a couple of no heat issues, and they've always been responsive, and they came right out to this one as well. And they got looking at it. The unit's 22 plus years, according to Scotty Simons up there. He says he's been up there for as long as he has, and that's 22 years. They got looking at it, and the manifold is cracked. I believe they put some pictures in there as well. Yeah.
Photos, yeah.
So it was causing a gas leak in the housing, so it wasn't put it out of service. It's not safe for use. Given the age of it, they were having a hard time finding parts for it. It's old. That being said, while they were there, I asked them to give me a price on replacing the unit with a newer one. Same output, same idea, forced hot air, ceiling mounted. The difference being it would be vented through just a 4-inch piece of PVC, like a lot of the newer ones are. So save us from having to repair all that expensive metal asbestos out through the side, and it still would be in a bad location to be cleaned off by the next batch of snow and ice. So the new location would be the front of the building on the gable end. Nothing to get taken out by snow, and they came up
That
with.
would make sense.
Yeah. So, they came up with $4,600. In talking with town administrator there, typically this is something that me and him would just work on and go about purchasing, but given the fact that I want to take it out of capital, I got to come in front of the board here tonight and, seeing if you guys could authorize the $4,600 come out of there and kind of save it from coming out of the operating budget for the facility so early in the season.
Mhm.
So looking to take it out.
And
of
no
the
one
capital.
else looked at it? It was strictly Lang's service
It-
that came out and take a look? took a
It
look at
was, like, I had called them out there for the service call and, I used them in the past.
Mhm.
And they've come right out. So while he was there, I
And they
asked for
usually
a
do a
price.
very
yeah.
good job.
Right.
Um,
I felt like I was
under-
comfortable in their
under-
pricing.
Have to.
We don't have to get more than one.
Right.
I did, just so you know, I did, we talked earlier, I did look that back up. So we changed, the bid threshold for sealed bids is 30,000.
Okay.
For quotes and, competitive, that threshold had been moved last year to 10,000.
Thank you.
Seth, quick question. Just thinking about this thing having a leak in it, do any of the guys work in there with the heat on and no ventilation? Do we have a CO2 alarm or should we?
Yeah, so that garage isn't heated all the time. In the
No.
wintertime, it is kind of a workshop more or less. The loader lives in there overnight and everything else, but as a general rule, and the building's fairly old and the insulation is fairly poor. So typically it's on for short periods of time if they're in there working on a piece of equipment or they have, a piece of equipment that needs to be thawed out. It's built up with snow and ice. They'll bring it in there, turn the heat on. At that time, a lot of times they do work in there. There is smoke detectors and stuff in the building. I'm not sure of CO. I would assume it's a combination unit, to be totally honest with you.
To add to that, is that a power vented system or is that just a gravity natural?
The new unit?
The
Or-
new unit, once it's installed, it's going to be a PVC 4-inch.
Yes, right, yeah.
So
power
this
vent on
going
the
to be
side.
just gravity
Yeah,
exhausted by the unit itself, or is this assisted by power vent
it's gonna be exhausted by the unit itself, yeah, just the condensating,
condensate?
yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we authorized the Department of Public Works Director to reward a contract for a replacement gas furnace to Lang in the amount of $4,603.10.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
Thank you.
thank you.
On to number 3, Town Report 2024, report cover.
Yes, if you look in your books, we included some photographs, usually provide a few photographs for the board to choose for the annual report cover.
I am partial to the town hall,
first
the
one,
the
right?
older town
Yeah.
hall photo. Before the ramp
Mm-hmm.
and before the stairs.
Yeah, back original. What about you guys down there?
I'm partial to number 3.
Number
I like
3?
number 2. This should be fun.
All right, here we go.
Okay, yeah, this is gonna be interesting.
Maybe we flip coins, draw straws. or
Yeah.
something, I don't know.
Do we rocks, paper, scissors? for this one?
Yeah, this is interesting, yeah.
I'd lean toward number 1 if we could plumb up that picture a little bit.
Yeah, will we be able
Yeah,
to?
get rid of
Move
the
it in a little bit?
utility line.
I don't,
The utility lines, yeah.
I think
true.
it's a picture of a picture.
It's a
Little
It's a
photo
picture of a picture.
I think is where that came from. So I don't. What's that? That's right, next year, that's
Now you're
right.
Yep.
talking.
With the ramp and the wall.
That's right.
I could be swayed to number 2.
I am so influential.
See, I was just gonna say, if it's not 1, I would have gone with 3.
I'm gonna say three. Say three.
Why you flip flop? All right, we take
know.
who's got what? What do you guys want to do?
All right, then I'll make a motion that we accept number 3 for the town cover.
I'm gonna second number 3. All those in favor?
Number 3 it is.
Aye.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
good.
Thank you.
All right, on to number 4. That is the Kidneys for Kindness nonprofit T-shirt sales location in Alton on the ice.
Yeah.
Okay, anything for this one?
So this was a hawkers and vendors, or a sales and solicitation license request that had come in. It was moved from the consent to, new business. So just so that if the board had any questions, they wanted to discuss anything in regards to it for the license, that they could have a chance for that conversation.
Well, one of the things is this, under anything with the Carnival?
As far as, they may be, I assume they're probably planning on selling at the Winter Carnival,
Mhm.
but the Winter Carnival permit was put in through the ABA and Christy Pancho.
Mhm.
Is for the individual vendors who are there. She has
Mhm.
those lists, that those
Yeah.
don't get presented to us.
So I'm asking
I'm
that because
assuming-
they would already have a hawkers vendors.
No, they're applying.
What I'm saying
oh,
is
sorry.
for the event for the carnival itself.
For the carnival
Already would.
itself.
That's why I asked if
Okay,
it was under.
apologize. Yeah,
No,
no,
they're
but
not gonna be, because they're looking to go, up until April 1st.
yeah, this
Every
one is,
weekend till-
is for every weekend, for a regular license, not just the Winter Carnival.
Well,
Now, I don't see anything on this that says what they're selling, T-shirts.
I'm
Have
sorry,
we
I'm
ever
trying-
allowed anybody to sell on the ice other than for Winter Carnival? Has that ever happened?
Yes.
We have?
Yes.
On a reoccurring schedule like this?
Yes, yeah. There's been food out there before. There's been food vendors that have gone out there, Winter Carnival. There's been other, sales of other, things like for the, Alton Bay Ice Runway. For selling hats and things like that, so,
I thought that was
things like that, but that was all part under the Alton Bay,
ice run.
Ice Runway.
Nothing
Yeah.
other than the ice runway? Like as far as like somebody selling T-shirts, has anybody ever?
I don't
Got a
recall
permit to
anybody
do it.
selling T-shirts out there or anything like that, other than food, hot chocolate, that type of thing. But I was curious as to what these T-shirts are. The proceeds are going, which I think is great, Kidneys for Kindness. I think that's awesome. But, what are they selling on the shirts for?
What are they? Yeah.
What is the logo? What is it? What are they using? My understanding, what was passed on, I didn't see it written on here, was that, they had Ice Runway logos on the T-shirts. Or I don't know where the logo came from. I don't know if there's a, but I'm assuming. That's my understanding of the request.
Is the applicant here?
No, not that I know of.
No, they're not here.
Well, like I said, again, this is a great cause. We don't know exactly if it's gonna be, T-shirts of the ice runway, or does it say the airport? Does it say anything? And did they get permission from those people in order to do so? Secondly, I think this is, again, it's a great cause. It's for Kidneys for Kindness. Why aren't they advertising that?
Well, I could certainly go back to the applicant and ask them to
Get
be
more
at the next
information.
meeting.
Yeah, if they.
I mean, this weekend is the Winter Carnival anyway.
That's true.
So they're all set to, if they're part of the carnival, they're fine for the weekend.
Okay.
Then we can answer those questions or readdress those questions.
Doing this does not establish any precedent that we don't already have.
That's why
Right.
I'm asking, yeah, I'm kind of worried.
No, there's
No,
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 this
this
isn't
is
setting a
precedent.
precedent for anything. I mean, we've had other organizations in the
That's
past.
what I was saying
and stuff
before.
like
We've
that,
had
yeah.
other things sold out on thing.
Absolutely.
But,
We haven't seen anything in a while. I think the ice hasn't been very
No.
successful in a
Well,
while.
2 years, the ice
Yeah.
runway hasn't been open. This is the first year in actually 3 years that it has opened. And I do know that they sell, hats and shirts themselves, which is on the ice.
Yeah, I think we should.
But I'm
Hey,
just
they're fine
curious.
This weekend, but table it to the next meeting.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to, I'm always an advocate for any kind of fundraiser or nonprofit or anything going on, but following on somebody else's shirt tails, that always bothers me.
Can we ask them to
Yeah.
give us some more information or be here for the next one?
Yeah.
All right.
Certainly.
Thank you.
All right, on to old business, Milfoil Committee, NHDES Grant Funds Acceptance.
Mr. Chairman, speaking as the Milfoil Committee representative, I was very happy to see this because each year we don't know what the reimbursement rate will be from the state. And there's always the risk that they would reduce it. In this case, they did not. So I would offer a motion that we accept the Milfoil grant from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services in the amount of $42,070.
Second,
If you could amend that, if you don't mind, to authorize the town administrator to sign on behalf. The grant paperwork, that would be great.
Oh, I'm sorry, what did I miss?
Can we amend it to have Ryan be the authorization to extend?
Oh, okay. With town administrator to be the authorized agent to expend the funds.
To sign. Say
Sign the
sign.
grant.
to sign.
To sign,
For
oh,
him
okay.
authorized to sign.
Man, this is getting complicated.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
All right, 2, you're up again, gentlemen. Swap shop update.
Gentlemen, I put into our selectmen's booklet here a significant amount of information as I wanted to both give the board an idea of what we're looking at and what's happening, and also hopefully get some guidance from the board in terms of various questions. There are several pages of information here. We did rely to a considerable extent on existing procedures from other New Hampshire towns who have successful programs. And I'm happy to say those towns have been very cooperative. They've learned a lot from their experience, and I think we will benefit from their experience. We include in there a general outline of our operating rules and procedures. This is a first cut, and they definitely require some editing and adjustment, but they cover most of the items that have had concerns expressed with them or questions raised about them. I realize nobody's had a chance to read any of this. But maybe some of us.
Yeah.
All right, that means I'm in real trouble then. Also included in there is our shop swap executive board. And that group has obtained the necessary state authorization and a local bank account that will allow us to accept and expend donations from the public. And we hope to receive a considerable amount. We also have a facility outline proposed layout concept based both on some sketches of possibilities. And those are based on experience with your previous swap shop. And notations on what we might need to do with the structure that we're going to be working with, which you all know is a shipping container. We are proposing, both for appearance and safety, to do some floor patching and have a linoleum floor covering, to paint both the inside and the outside. Most likely to frame the end wall that faces the area that you drive down to get to the swap shop in a wood framing, swinging both steel doors permanently to the outside and fastening them so they don't have to be used, and instead have a framed wall there that will incorporate a typical entrance door and probably a window for ventilation and light. And then in the interest of safety and more light, a an additional remote exit close to the other end of the structure. We have an offer, a very generous offer from one of our local businesses, Maine's Electric, to provide and donate the material and the labor to provide power, which would be a great advantage to us. They cannot do the trenching, but I'm quite certain either the town can do the trenching or we have another offer from another local business to address the trenching. The last time we mentioned power, everybody got excited because it wasn't something that we were contemplating. But now we have an opportunity to have power at essentially no cost to the town. And that would allow us some really significant benefits, primarily that we could do some ventilation. I haven't been inside one of those containers on a summer day in July, but I understand they're almost unbearable. And also, more important, we could put in good lighting, which would be a great benefit from both the utility point of view, as people could see what they might swap, and also from the safety point of view, as they could see where they were going and what they were doing. I also wanted to discuss a little bit or get some input from the board on the availability of funding. We do have some public donations, and we are planning to solicit more and hoping to get more. I assume that we have used some town funds to do the work that's been done to date. And I don't know what the feeling of the board is in terms of continuing to use town funds. I think the Capital Reserve Improvement Fund wording is such that this would certainly be a justified use. And that capital fund right now, if I read the numbers right, well, it had a balance of 178,000. Seth just blew floor of that on me, so it's down to 174. But assuming our budget passes, that'll be increased by another 20,000 this year. And that kind of expenditure, the kind of expenditure we might be looking at, although I don't have a budget right now, is probably at more than 2 or 3% of that amount. And when I looked at the CIP plan that goes out to 2030, currently, we have no planned expenditures from that fund whatsoever, although I'm sure its purpose will result in the use of some funds for routine maintenance and upkeep of the recycling facility. We have a targeted opening date of the first Friday in May, which is May 2nd. And we're planning initially anyhow to operate either Fridays and Saturdays or Saturdays and Mondays for a 6-hour period each day, starting at 10 a.m. And we would have 2 volunteers at all times. At any time that we didn't have 2 volunteers, we would have to close the facility down until such time as we did. We would also close the facility for inclement weather or incredibly hot streak or brutal downpours, that type of thing. And of course, we're topping operation from May until the middle of October, so hopefully we wouldn't have to deal with any snow. Right now, we have had 12 volunteers that have stepped forward and offered to work without any recruiting efforts. We've just initiated some recruiting efforts. I expect to get a good response. Alton is general with a town that does very well, I think, with voluntary work. We have situations like our garden club, our athletic activities, our parks activities, even our ice runway, where people in Alton have more than willing to step forward and do more than their part. And I'm reasonably confident that we will be able to have enough volunteer participation so that will not be a problem. Can't guarantee it, but other towns that I've talked to have done very well in that regard. It actually becomes something of a social event and is something that many of the volunteers look forward to. As far as safety concerns, the structure, of course, is at a ground level. There are no steps. If we can do the power, we'll have good interior lighting. Do the linoleum, we'll have a new floor that's easy to keep clean. the staff at the recycling center has worked out a circular traffic pattern, which will allow us to minimize any backing, which is of course always a risk, and allow people to come and go in safety. There's a good amount of space for parking. And I think overall, you can't say there is absolutely no risk. There's never no risk to anything, but the risks are minimal. And in order to cover us in that regard, we certainly would look for an approval inspection from Primex, our carrier, who has given us a lot of good input to date, and from our local building inspector and fire and police departments. And if you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
So I do have a question. One of the things I remember from very early on was discussion about not accepting anything with power cords.
Correct.
And I see that it is in here that, you know, the items with power cords are permitted.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I said we have to do some editing. And, one other thing, I'm sorry that I didn't mention that's in here is an action item list with responsibilities and dates. And we would propose to the next board meeting, present a specific list of things that would be accepted and things that would be prohibited, so the board could approve, disapprove, alter, adjust as they see fit. Some towns do accept small appliances with power cords, and they accept it based on plugging the thing in, expecting the cord, and making sure it works. The justification primarily was that a lot of people have perfectly good, usable, small appliances, many that are a result of Christmas and birthday presents, that they don't want to throw out, but they have no use for. But you certainly could say any electrical appliance represents some slight risk, and if someone were to take one and bring it home and burn down their house, they probably come back to the town and ask what we're going to do about it. So the other possibility is a waiver form, perhaps, that anyone that takes this on an electrical appliance signs and says, yeah, I hold the town harmless for any damage that may be done if this appliance proves to be defective. Or we can just eliminate them altogether.
Okay. You also mentioned about the town possibly contributing money to this effort. Have you established a budget? Do you know what I to fully develop this is yet?
No, I
don't
haven't.
think so.
I started to, and I failed miserably. And so I backed off. A couple of our board members have been active in soliciting quotes from various vendors. So we have some numbers, but not enough to sit here and say, we need $3,000 or we need $5,000. However, I think we can probably have that by the next meeting, by the 25th, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I think that'd be acceptable. One of the things I wanted to actually ask Public Works Director Seth on, now that the container's been placed and some of the things that we've discussed and of repair work that needs to be done that we think we could do in-house. If you don't mind coming up, please.
While you're up there, do you mind cutting the power off to that projector?
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Before somebody gets blinded.
So the container's been moved into place up there. It's been roughly leveled after the ground's been disturbed in the springtime. We'd like to go back through and make sure it's actually level and hasn't settled on one corner or the other. A lot of the material that was used there was already there. We didn't haul in all that much gravel. There was a little bit to improve the surface a little bit. Springtime will be a good tell if it's going to turn muddy or not down in there. That being said, it may need a little bit more gravel to tighten it up. The container overall is in good condition there. The floor, it does have some issues.
I've looked at, not to interrupt, but I've gone through and looked at the flooring and some of the container itself, doors at the bottom.
Right.
The metal that needs to be removed and replaced, and
It does, yeah. So the doors at the bottom they're actually a little short. They were trimmed at some point. And there is some of the metal flashing on the inside that's curled out, that's sharp, that needs to be addressed if those doors are gonna remain on there, just with people coming in and out of them. I don't have a solid cost. I used to put those trailer doors on all the time. I used to know how much they cost. I couldn't tell you right now what they cost, but I mean, that is something I'm capable of doing. If I had to guess, just throwing numbers out there, you'd probably be looking at $300 a door to change one of those, depending on what hardware it could save off of the old ones to replace them in kind with container doors. The roof, the last time I looked at it, looked pretty solid. Didn't see any breaks in it. It is already an aluminum roof. I was looking through the manual there. It mentioned an aluminum colored roof to reject heat. That is an aluminum roof trailer, and it looked to be solid. So I don't really think any coating up there would do it any justice. They do get hot. So
do you think you would have the time this spring to be able to replace the floor or to do the necessary patching, repairing on the floor, the doors, and possibly a side door?
Right. The floor
window.
itself, I feel like I could task grounds and maintenance to take care of that. And the way I would go at that would be pretty simply to lay some plywood down on the floor, butt it up tight, screw it down. The floor in there is an oak floor. It does have some breaks in it, but
It does.
all in all, it's sound. I feel if we put some plywood over it, it would be more than sufficient to walk on. I feel like the floor is something that we can tackle. Putting a door on the side of it's a little bit different. The spacing in those trailers, it's a sheet and post design. They're not 16 on center like a house or anything like that. They're all different from manufacturer. They're typically 2 feet, but it could be done, I feel like, but it would take some work. If you could get around not putting a door on the side, I would definitely advise against a window, just because those trailers do have a tendency to rack, and I feel like it would crack. You know, it would break a regular conventional house window if you had one in there, quite honestly. You know, a good cross window on those trailers do twist and
They
move.
twist a
So,
little.
I feel like putting a large piece of glass in the side of it, you would run the risk of it breaking over time just from
Or
movement.
possibly plexiglass.
Right.
Plexiglass was a little more flexible than anything else.
Right.
And you've seen what they drew out. Which one do you think is the best option? Removing both doors on that side and then using the back and cutting a hole in the back?
I think that the existing doors, although ugly,
They are ugly, but
are the most structurally sound, you know, and typically those trailer doors would give you a way to lock it up at night. That's that in a way that it would be secure, more secure than framing in a wood piece at the end.
Well, if I can, one of the things that we had considered was leaving those doors permanently swung open and fastened to the outside.
Yep.
And constructing a conventional
doorway.
stick-built wall,
Doorway.
which would get us out of the whole business of, I tell you, those doors, I couldn't get them open. But
Yeah, they need some.
One of your guys came down and helped me, and I'm glad he did, or I'd still be there.
Yeah, they can
And-
be tricky and cumbersome at times, for sure.
Structurally frame a wall inside.
Without- yeah,
You-
but if
You
we
could
need-
frame that inside, open the doors or remove the doors and frame.
But what if we had to do on like an emergency egress on the backside?
That would have to be cut in through the metal and then
Is that gonna,
cut
will
in,
that,
and
in-
then
will
that
that
would have to be framed in.
change the way that structural rigidity of that trailer is?
If you put one in the side, I feel like it would. If
So
you
the
were,
back
if you were
would
gonna
be the
put a
only-
door, another access into that, I would put it at the front, just because it's a smaller, it's a smaller square. You're talking about a more structurally sound shape than putting one broadside in it, you know, as far as snow load on the roof and everything else.
Rigidity, you can reinforce that with a header across any doorway going through the side, even though it is steel. And there's a steel frame. Anything with a header is going to carry
Right, down to
load
the side of the door
and
frame.
weight. So
Yeah.
something can be cut in the side pretty easily
Yeah,
and then framed in with a proper size header on the side and reinforced. I don't think that would be a major issue.
okay. I feel like if you were to swing the doors open and leave them permanently, you know, swung open, at that point, I would just take them off, because even.
Just take 'em off.
Even
Right.
swung open, you'd still have to address the sharp edges
That's right.
of the door itself. I mean, it's just pins. They come off pretty easy.
And then you still have, plans for fencing.
Yeah, I think before we discussed, yeah, putting up
That's
some
what we
no
discussed
fencing.
before,
Just-
fencing for the parking area and to come in, a gated
Yeah,
entry
yeah, just
to enter and to exit.
right, to delineate it so that people don't mosey from one side to the other, or leave the area essentially and get in the way of where waste management could be moving containers, or the loader could be loading containers, yeah. So,
Thank you.
well, Rob?
So I think for the power, is there any way we could get, Maines to put something in writing saying they were donating that to us? That's what we.
Oh,
need
yeah.
to
Suppose
get the
so,
approval.
yeah.
Well, I just asked Ryan, I said, what do we need to get this going?
Yeah.
So we'd need him to give us something and then we can take it and be like, okay,
Right.
good, we're all set.
We just won't do any trenching. That would have to be
Yeah,
done. And then you
yep.
can run the power to the.
Yep, we'd have to
To
find
the
somebody
structure.
to do the trenching. Who, didn't you say somebody was talking about doing the trenching for him?
Yeah, there was a possibility for Kelly Sullivan's outfit.
We need to, one of the things, if I may, one of the things that the Public Works Director mentioned to me before the meeting with the regards to the trenching, I mean, obviously, we can't finalize anything till spring, because he mentioned there's some under drainage that comes out, and he's not sure exactly where it originates from, as to whether it's gonna affect the trenching route, or whether we have to go in a different direction. He said it comes out just either beyond or, yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't explain the way you were telling me.
And so, looking at where that container is now, that little kind of grassy bump that's just before going down the hill, that's where the under drain daylights, and I believe it's from the back side of the wall. So I don't know where in relation that plumbing crosses over. So if we were to run a trench, I think the best place to take it from would be that hole that the old swap shop, I believe, used to run off. That way it would be minimal disturbance to paved surfaces. I don't think there would be any. I think we'd be able to stay out of the pavement, which would be a lot cheaper. Like I said, I don't know where that under drain actually runs across. So it'd be something that we'd have to look at and see if we can track down.
There's no mapping, at the transfer station for that.
If there is, I haven't seen it. I haven't dug for it very much either. I know that it does daylight there, so it's in there somewhere. We'll just have to determine where it is.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Thanks,
No, I think a lot of this is, good suggestions and, looking at, obviously, we definitely have to look at and relook at the list of acceptable items. Again, especially again, going with the electrical.
Yep.
Most of the rest of it looks pretty good. I see there's actually some training for the volunteers.
Yeah, and we were able to get from one of the other towns a pretty detailed training manual that includes things like checklists when you first get there and locking up. And also, one of our staff members has significant amount of training and capabilities in the area of safety training. So we will definitely suck her in as the training officer, even though she may not know it yet.
Okay. Okay.
That's a pretty good update so far.
It's a good update. Yeah.
Yep, excellent.
Yeah. I think that's good.
So now, going forward, when you're picking out which kind of design you guys want to go with on the inside.
Yeah, we have a meeting Friday morning.
Yeah.
And we will try to finalize that,
Iron it all out.
as well as finalize the questions about what should be accepted and what shouldn't.
That's correct. That's important.
Who did the drafting?
You mean, oh,
The drawings?
the
Very good.
concept,
Very good.
this Lady over in the corner.
Excellent.
No, it looks good.
Perfect. Gonna be nice. All right, so we'll look for an update at the next meeting. Yep. All right, perfect.
All right, thank you very much, Richard.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
It's selectmen reports.
I've got nothing.
The Milfoil Committee, we had a joint meeting with our partners from Wolfboro. And they requested information on what the actual intertown agreement was, which I'm sure Ryan has provided them by now. And also, they had suggested that we might consider the Lakes Region Planning Group, who apparently provides recycling services for some of their member towns, which certainly would be the easy way out if they fit our needs. We are not, Alton is not currently a member. Wolfboro is. That could be a stumbling block, but it's an opportunity to explore that possibility. And if it were to happen to work, the kind of stuff that Ryan and I looked at each other when we lost Sarah and said, we're just doomed. There's no way we can make this work. But maybe with the Lakes Region people, we'd be able to do it.
Okay. I don't have anything. The zoning board did not meet last Thursday due to the snowstorm.
The only update I have is the planning board's on Tuesday, and we go to the TA report.
All right. First of all, just to follow up on Dick's report on hazardous waste. Since that meeting, I did have a Zoom meeting with all the members of Lakes Region Planning Commission and the representatives from Wolfboro on our hazardous waste collection days. They have the information now. They have the mutual inter-municipality agreement between Wolfboro and Alton. I also provided them with 3 years worth of budgeting and expenditures, so they could see how we were running and breaking down things cost-wise. So those folks are going to have a twofold conversation. They'll have a conversation with Wolfboro and Alton in regards to scope of work and cost to run and manage our collections on the same schedule that we already have. The other thing is there'll be an independent conversation, as Dick had stated, that Alton is not a member of the Lakes Region Planning Commission. And that would probably be something that we will need to revisit with the board. I think that also is a planning board thing. I think the decision to pull out of it was involved planning board last time. But I think
Many years ago.
yeah, and I think now with this turn of them providing services from a hazardous waste, I'm not so sure that's going to fall into the planning realm as much as it is the Board of Selectmen at that point too. But nonetheless, I'm supposed to be getting much more information and we'll have more conversation forthcoming.
Yeah, understanding that membership with the Lakes Region Planning costs money.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, there's a cost to the membership and then obviously we have our, whatever the cost is going to be through the joint agreement with Wolfboro. So definitely some conversation to have. The other thing I have is the moderator had asked me to let the board know that on March 4th at 9 a.m. is the ballot counting and the testing of the voting machines before town voting.
Okay.
So we
What's
need
the date again?
it's March 4th
March
at 9 a.m. And that is, we need to have at least 2 board members there. But certainly every single one of them, every single one of you are welcome. So,
Okay.
but we need to definitely make sure we have at least 2 covering.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Thank you.
And then the other thing to put out to the board is, we realized that on, our next schedule, or I mean, I should say our scheduled meeting in March falls on voting. So we have to push either to the left or to the right. So we can either do it, reschedule it for, Monday, the 10th, or we can push it to March 12th, which is Wednesday after voting.
Have to be the 10th for me.
10th.
10th. Yeah.
Consensus down yonder?
I can do either, so
Anybody got any problem with the 10th?
10th.
Nope, 10th works.
10th.
Okay, so we will go with, so we will change that on the calendar that our first meeting in March will be on Monday, the 10th.
Okay.
That is all I got.
Okay, thank you. We need an approval of the minutes for January 28th, 2025.
I make a motion to approve the minutes for January 28th, 2025, public session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
On to the consent agenda. I have a motion for the consent agenda. We move. that one.
We
Yeah,
removed
that
that one.
number
Number
three is
3 was
removed.
taken off of that, so I make
So
a
just one and
motion,
two.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda for this evening, February 11th,
As amended,
as amended.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No discretionary act for appointments? No.
Nope.
Public input limited to 5 minutes per person on any governmental town business issue.
Good evening, gentlemen. Kelly Sullivan.
Good evening.
I wanted to start with the presentation by T and
Ty and Bond.
Ryan Bond. Thank you, sorry. Scary numbers for sure, jarring pictures. As a water user, I appreciated that full study. I feel that the town historically, before the last few years, puts the tax bracket ahead of maintenance sometimes, and you can't do that. I feel like maintenance is like, would you not change your oil in your car? So I can see where we need some improvements. It was definitely scary numbers. I thought their presentation was very thorough. I like that they gave the CIP in 2 forms. They gave you a 10-year, they gave you a 20-year, they kind of broke it down. And so I appreciated that. Lots to think about for sure, but that helps us make better decisions going forward. And I just, since Courtney came on, I've seen nothing but improvements. I've been a water user for a couple of decades now. So I do remember the times when we didn't have a water commissioner. We had one, we didn't have one. So she's been the consistency for the last few years. When we went and changed from the road and a water separate, and we went under the umbrella of the DPW with Scott Kinman, who I was sad to see leave. I saw nothing but improvements with that, so I appreciate the DPW. And then with Courtney on board, again, that continuity and you just, I see that as a customer, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that she does with her rather small crew. I was one of the first meters they came out and changed because I have a house that's built in 1860 originally, so it had a really old meter in it. They came out, they did the job, no problem. Anytime I've had an issue, which is not very often, no problem. So just want the public to realize that even though those were scary numbers, that was just a study to help us make better decisions going forward. And I appreciate that as a water customer. And I want to thank Mr. Shea for his presentation on the swap shop. It was thorough. I appreciate everybody listening to it, having good conversation and moving forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Can we identify the supplier of the cookies?
Cookies?
That would be Joe. That would be Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Closing public input? Yep. Oh, we're good. Nope. Okay. Any non-public this evening?
No.
And I will take
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I will second.
all in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, sir.